Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here with us tonight for Survivor Stories 2023. We all know life can be difficult, but when we come together for events like this to hear each other's stories, we remember that we have each other to help us along the way. Tonight, we will hear from Jody Hollinsworth, whose battle with breast cancer propelled her to open a bakery. From Laura Emmons, whose struggle with an eating disorder inspired her to become a counselor to help others. From Kelly Westbrook, who lost a year of her memory due to a traumatic brain injury from a car accident, spending 12 days in a coma and months in therapy to learn how to do daily tasks again. From Jimmy Williams, a heart transplant survivor who is now a motivational speaker. From Courtney Tranquil, who spent time in prison and is now a peer support specialist for people struggling with addiction. And from Donna Bullard, a colon cancer survivor who uses her experience with cancer to help the students she works with as a social worker. Tonight, as we hear their stories, if you're currently navigating something difficult, listen to be assured you're not alone. And if you're not, listen to support those offering their hard-won wisdom and generosity and love. We thank the St. Francis Foundation for partnering with us at Rest Media and the Southeast Missourian to bring these stories of hope to our community. Thank you again so much for being here with us tonight as we celebrate all that it means to be a survivor. And before we welcome Jody to the stage, we just ask that everyone would make sure that your phones are turned on silent or turned off for the evening. Thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Jody Hollinsworth, and thank you for joining me over the next few minutes as I take a walk down memory lane and share my survivor story with you. In 2011, we were a family of 6 going on about daily life like any other family. Both my husband and I worked, and our 4 kids were at the ages of 13, 11, 10, and 7. I was exhausted, and I just didn't understand how others my age with kids had way more energy than I did. I could literally sleep 24/7. I remember telling my husband something just isn't right, like I can't stay awake. I could wake up in the morning, and within 15 minutes of being awake, I was falling asleep again. My eyes just would not stay open. In May of 2011, I remember feeling a sensation in my left breast. It would come and go over the next few weeks and would continue to happen more often. I tried to explain to my husband the best I could that it was like a lighter being flicked in my breast, short bursts of burning sensations. I decided to go to our local nurse practitioner. She put me on some medication for neuropathy, thinking I was just having nerve pain in my breast. I thought to myself, that's weird. I have never heard of anyone else having that, but I guess we'll give it a try. About a week later, while I was getting ready, which I do undressed, I noticed my breasts looked weird. Once again, thinking I was just going crazy or seeing things, I yelled for my oldest daughter and husband to come in and look and see if they could see anything on my breast. Both agreed it definitely did not look right, and it was sucking inward from the underside. The next morning, I called the nurse practitioner and told her I needed an ultrasound immediately. The ultrasound confirmed what I was worried about. There was a nasty-looking mass in my left breast about the size of a walnut. From this point, life became so chaotic. We met with my surgical oncologist, Dr. Dale, in Columbia around June 14th. While we were given a ton of information that day, I also was sent for a mammogram to get a better look at the mass. We were then called into the room and discussed what was going to happen next. He said, "You're going to have a bilateral mastectomy. The lump is too large for a lumpectomy, and given the looks of the tumor, we will just remove both so you don't have to come for a second surgery. You will go for genetic testing, as there is no history of breast cancer, and you are too young to see if you are a BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene mutation carrier. You're then going to undergo chemo." That's where I stopped him and I said, "Am I going to lose my hair?" Let me just say this. I had already prepared myself for the cancer diagnosis, but the hair loss, well, that is what hit me the hardest that day, crazy as it may sound. He looked at me and said, "Yes, you're going to lose your hair. You will then undergo radiation and, depending on testing, another surgery." My family and myself all handled the news fairly well, and there was never a time during any of this that I thought about the possibility of dying. I remember thinking, okay, let's get things started so it can all be over and we can go back to a normal life. My mother and I went back a couple times for ultrasound-guided biopsies, genetic testing for myself, and a PET scan. A few days prior to surgery, we got the call that I had the BRCA1 gene mutation. The BRCA1 gene mutation just means you're at a greater risk of developing breast cancer or ovarian cancer at a younger age, which totally makes sense since I was 32 and that was a young for a cancer diagnosis. I said I think the hardest part about getting the BRCA1 diagnosis was the fact I already had children. This means that they had a 50-50 chance of having it too. This is heartbreaking for me to know I could have passed this on to them and they might have to go through what I am now. That is no burden a mother wants to carry. On June 30th, 2011, with a waiting room full of my family and friends, I underwent my bilateral mastectomy with immediate reconstruction. Let me just stop there. Nothing was ever mentioned to me about prosthetics, never once. All I remember them telling me was, "You're young and a good candidate for immediate reconstruction, and we will get them to look as close as possible to natural. We will even tattoo nipples on to make them look more real for you." Along with my breast removal, they took 10 lymph nodes and 7 out of 10 were positive for cancer. My final diagnosis after pathology came back was triple negative invasive ductal carcinoma stage 2B. I really don't remember much during recovery other than over the next few months and things that my family and friends had shared. One thing I can say is recovery is hard, and I couldn't have done it without my family and close friends. My kids had to grow up so much faster than most, and the responsibilities that were thrown at them at such a young age has made them who they are today. In August of 2011, I started my next chapter, and that was the dreaded chemo. I had the privilege of getting that fun drug known as Red Devil. This is a drug that is going to make me lose all my hair. And when I say lose my hair, I mean all my hair. Eyebrows, eyelashes, everything. I did 6 treatments of this drug plus another chemo drug every other week. Chemo days were long, and we were usually there for 7 to 8 hours. A few weeks into those treatments, my hair began to fall out, so the time had came we needed to shave my head. I made a trip to my best friend's house, and Elizabeth did what any best friend would do and shaved my head. We cried and cried. That day was harder than the "you have cancer" day. I went on receiving 6 weeks of chemo and 1 chemo drug during that period. Chemo altered my vision, but it also made me highly allergic to horses. Once chemo was finished, I had a couple weeks off of the treatment. In January of 2012, I began radiation treatment, and it was intense. I did this daily, Monday through Friday, for the next 6 to 8 weeks. I received radiation from my neck all the way down to about 2 inches under where my breast had been. I had severe burning on the left side from treatment. Luckily, I didn't have much feeling in that area, and I'm thankful because I can't imagine how much pain I would have been in. Remember how I said, depending on how genetic testing came back, would depend on if I needed another surgery? Well, in May of 2012, I had to go in for an oophorectomy to have my ovaries removed to reduce the chance of ovarian cancer. After a few months of healing from radiation and that surgery, I began the reconstruction process. In August of 2012, I started getting fills of my breast expanders. We did this for about 10 months, and in May of 2013, I had my breast implants placed. Now, I wish I could say this is where my story ended and I had amazing breasts and got to pick out my nipples, but unfortunately, that was not the case for me. In July of 2013, we decided to move to Alabama. With my dad and my stepmom, And moving to Alabama meant I was going to have to find a new plastic surgeon to help try and fix the left side, as I just wasn't happy with how it looked. It was caving in due to the tumor being so big and deep. I found a plastic surgeon at UAB at a well-known hospital, and he had good reviews. I met with them, and we decided the best approach would be a latissimus dorsi flap. This was where they would excise the muscle from my left back area and move it around to the front and rebuild the breast area. And this is where the real nightmare begins. On November 14th, 2013, I underwent the latissimus dorsi surgery, and things did not go as planned. They ended up nicking the main blood supply to that flap. I remember waking up from that surgery and knowing something was wrong. My surgeon and his team came into the room that night and stated things didn't go quite as planned, and we will be going back to the OR in a few days. I was out of it, and I couldn't wrap my mind around all of this. My dad stayed with me during that stay, as we were 3 hours from home, and my husband had to continue working. Over the next few days, I would undergo leech therapy to try and revive and keep the blood flow to the flap. Yes, you heard that correctly, leech therapy. They would bring leeches into my room every few hours and stick them on the flap. Now, thankfully, I couldn't feel those suckers on me, but when they would fill and fall off, I would freak out. Now, I'm actually the patient that will be up and moving quickly after surgery because I don't want to stay in a hospital longer than necessary, but this time was different. It was like I couldn't move. I couldn't think straight, and I honestly thought this was it, and I was scared. I remember saying to my dad, I don't know what's wrong, I don't know what they're giving me, but something's not right. I was having hallucinations and was frustrated because I couldn't get up and walk. I kept trying to force myself to do things, but my body wasn't cooperating. I remember lying there scared out of my mind and fighting my body to overcome and get up and thinking this cannot be happening to me. I have 4 kids at home and a husband I need to get to. I remember I had heartburn so bad one night, and I called the nurse in and started questioning her about what they were giving me or if they were giving me my daily meds. Come to find out, they had not been doing that. I had been off my thyroid medicine for 3 days, and it was causing me to have a thyroid storm, which caused the hallucinations and other things. Once we got all the medication straight, I was finally able to come back to my senses. They took me back to the OR on 11/19, 5 days after the first surgery, to move that flap to the front. The surgery went better than the first time. Leech therapy was continued a few days, and I was finally able to move my legs enough to start getting up and pushing myself to walk the hall so I could go home. I got released from the hospital, and a few days after Thanksgiving that year, about a week or 2 after being home, I noticed my incision was just not looking good. I contacted my surgeon, and he agreed that I should come back and be looked at. I said, I'm pretty certain it's infected, to which he said, no, that's just your adipose tissue decaying, it's fine. He debrided it, flushed it with antibiotics, and said, we'll see you in a week. We headed home, and by this time, and I'm still feeling blah, no energy, and just very tired. My incision continued to get worse, and by this time, my little Yorkie thought it was so bad he would get on my lap and start trying to bury me with his nose. Of course, we laughed because that was cute, but on the other hand, it's not a very good sign when your dog's trying to bury you. I went back a week later, and the surgeon did some more debriding and still acted like things were fine and moving along like they were supposed to. Now, with me having a medical background, I knew things were not okay, but I was at his mercy. The week of Christmas, I started spiking high fevers, but with it being the holidays, it was just hard to get in anywhere, and I remember thinking, just make it through Christmas. And that's exactly what I did. I went to the wound care clinic the day after Christmas. The physician there could tell I was very sick and immediately called UAB. My surgeon there still denied the fact that I was infected and basically refused to help me any further. The wound care clinic put me on meds, and I came in for weekly debridements till I could find a surgeon that would help me. Luckily, I had a friend that I had went to surg tech school with who had taken a position in Panama City, Florida, with a plastic surgeon who had been following my journey. I reached out to her, and her surgeon got me in right away. On Valentine's Day 2014, I underwent a surgery to remove the infected tissue and expander that had been placed by the UAB surgeon. Infectious disease was actually contacted. As it came back, I had staph, Pseudomonas, and VRE. I was a very sick girl. In fact, my infectious disease doctor said he didn't know how I was even sitting up in bed talking to him. He said, you're definitely a fighter. I left that hospital with a PICC line, wound vac, and extremely potent antibiotics. I had home health come in every few days for my wound vac changes, along with weekly visits to the wound clinic and hyperbaric chamber treatments. I had to have a few more surgeries on the left side and one to remove the implant from the right side, but that all led me to where I am now. During the last phase of fighting for my life, I had a lot of time to watch TV. I enjoyed to watch all those baking shows like Cupcake Wars and Cake Boss, and I always have been able to bake but could never decorate. I remember thinking to myself, I wish I could do that. Our kids never got to have those cute cakes for their birthdays because we couldn't afford them. And after everything the kids had done and given up to help me, that was the least I could do for them. I started watching people on YouTube decorate and look for recipes that I could tweak and make my own that tasted amazing. On July 18, 2014, I made my first decorated cake for my oldest daughter's 16th birthday. I made homemade fondant and all. It wasn't anything spectacular, but I gave it my all and was pretty pleased with how it turned out. I then started making cakes for school band functions and my other kids' birthdays, and before I knew it, friends were asking if I could make their kids' cakes. I was hesitant at first, but decided why not? Practice makes perfect. Word eventually started getting around, and I began to make some cakes for other people I didn't know quite as well. It was a hobby that kept me busy and gave me a sense of calmness and peace, since going back to work really wasn't an option at this time. Since God had blessed me with this talent, I wanted to be able to give back, and in 2015, I signed up to be a sugar angel for a nonprofit organization called Icing Smiles. I've had the pleasure of donating 8 dream cakes and also made decorated sugar cookies for critically ill children for their birthdays and special celebrations. In August of 2017, God brought us to Jackson, Missouri. And in February of 2018, we found a church home where we made so many friends and got to share my talent with many of those families, which grew my home bakery so much. We began looking at a storefront in 2019, then along came COVID and shut that down real quick. I continued to work and grow to the point it was just overtaking our home. In June of 2021, we signed a lease and opened the doors to the Baker's Bar on my youngest daughter's birthday, September 25th. We have grown so much over the 2 years, and we love sharing our treats with everyone and hope we can continue to serve our community for years to come. Thank you, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the evening as we listen to other survivor stories.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Laura Emmons. I'm a clinical coordinator at Gibson Center for Behavioral Change, where I work with addiction every day. And the thing that fueled my passion for working with addiction was my own struggle with an eating disorder for over 12 years. So when they first asked me to speak tonight, I was really excited. And then they told me I get 15 minutes. And I was like, okay, we can do this. Me and Courtney both. So I just really prayed that God would allow me to share the important parts tonight. And if anyone has any questions or anything, I'm happy to talk after or later on. So basically, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa at the age of 14 in August 2010 during my back to school physical. And at this point, it sounded like the nurse was kidding. I was like, huh? Because I'd always heard that eating disorders come from bullying or just hating your body and things like that. And for me, that just wasn't the case. I was actually a pretty confident kid, and I'd always at least thought I loved myself. And so what she noticed was the significant weight drop from my physical the year prior. And so over the next few months, I began to realize I am restricting my calories. And so I had never planned, and this is so important to know because this is how a lot of eating disorders start. I never planned to diet or lose all this weight. I just slipped into controlling my calories as a way to control something when everything around me was changing and felt chaotic. And just a little bit of backstory, I'd always just been a very competitive kid, very perfectionistic, very obsessive. If I set my mind to something, I did it. Just a lot of those driven traits, a lot of those traits that can be used for great things. But when combined with just a naturally internal processor, and just being very internal with my emotions, never really like sharing much like my brother always was, that just made the perfect storm for an eating disorder to emerge. So by the time I actually recognized this is an eating disorder, it was too late, and I was like, as they say, like married to the disorder. Like I was not giving this up for anything, because this was the only way I knew how to cope with things at this point, was restricting my calories. Because one, like I said, it gave me false control. When everything else seemed chaotic and crazy, I was like, I can control this, and it kept me like feeling stable. It gave me this odd sense of peace I'd never felt before. And then the other thing, it kept my mind so busy and focused on counting calories and calculating and subtracting and planning out every meal, like sitting there in class with my book open, but really like having my little notepad and calculating the calories of where we were going to go to family dinner that weekend and all that. It kept my mind so focused on other things I wasn't able to notice when I was feeling sad or notice when I was feeling anxious or anything. And it worked, like it really worked. So it became this very addictive thing. Like that was the only way I knew how to cope with things. So then fast forward my sophomore year of high school, I had my first binge, which I understand now is the brain's natural response to dieting. The survival brain kicks in to make us obsessed with food and gorge ourselves. But back then, that was very scary for someone who had spent the past year and a half, restricting their calories. So I felt out of control, and I felt like a failure, and like it was just terrifying. It was like this primal urge to binge on large amounts of food. So as the binges began to happen more and more, I was like, I have to compensate somehow. And so I was already a competitive gymnast. I was involved in lots of sports. I was always very active. But this is where the exercise really got carried away. And the compulsive exercise became the ultimate, like where it just became very disordered. Like the eating disorder alone was bad enough, but whenever I threw in this excessive exercise and exercising 7 to 9 hours a day, it was just like so disordered. But as a high schooler, my high school brain didn't know that. I didn't know that it wasn't normal to walk the halls as fast as you can between classes instead of talking to people, and at the restaurant going to the bathroom stall to do squats and ab workouts and things, and hide weights under your bed so that you could work out at night, set your alarm multiple times. Like, this is so disordered, but my little teenage brain didn't know that. It was just the only way I knew how to cope with difficult emotions. And at this point, it was just a full addiction. So it wasn't even whether I was happy or sad or anything, I was living in this eating disorder. And I always tell people, like, eating disorders, substance use disorders, they don't respond to logic because it's not a part of the brain it lives in. So people would be like, you look great, just eat. Like, what's going on? But to me, that was my coping skill. That was the only way I felt peace and I felt okay, was if I was doing these things. So by my junior year of high school, I was no longer able to even do gymnastics the way I was, and I was only practicing 1 to 2 days a week. I had really stepped back working there. I just did not have energy. In gym class, I could barely walk. Like, I remember severe muscle fatigue, and it wasn't like tired muscles. It was like, it felt like they were like just like tied in knots. I could barely walk, because when you're starving yourself, your muscles begin to decay. And so I was pulled from, I didn't know it was going to be my last gymnastics meet ever, but it was February 9th, 2013. And like, I had dreams of being a college gymnast. I wanted to do gymnastics as long as I could. And I was pulled from that competition by the medical team because they could tell I was ill. I mean, not only did I look it, eating disorders don't always look a certain type, but I did look very ill at this point. But I wasn't even doing my tumbling passes or anything. And you could just see it like in my face. Still to this day, the pictures from that meet, I'm like not okay. And I always like to mention too, like, mine hid very well because I maintained my grades and I maintained like my peer relationships and these things. It was very hard to see, like, how could this girl possibly have a mental health disorder, because everything seemed all great on the outside. And I came from a wonderful family. My parents are here tonight. Very loving, warm, amazing family. And I don't think they noticed either. I know they didn't, because we spent every waking second together. It was people, it wasn't until people that only saw me like once a year or so kind of noticed the change in my temperament and my body and things like that. So anyway, I was pulled from this meet and with a requirement of a doctor's note to come back to practice. And that meant I would have to heal and get better and give up the only coping skill I knew, which was my eating disorder. And I knew that wasn't going to happen. So that was just the end of gymnastics. I knew that was it. And that was like the longest car ride home that night. I remember like just journaling and feeling like, depressed. I didn't know that then. I just was like, oh my gosh, all these feelings, because my whole identity at the same time was wrapped up in being the skinny girl, the fit girl, everyone at school, like, how do you stay so small? I'm like, he, because that's the addictive mentality. You're like, you'll never know, but this is how I find my worth. And so my identity was also being the gymnast girl. And so I was like, who am I outside of gymnastics? And so senior year was really, really rough. And by the start of my senior year, I actually felt pretty proud of myself. The eating disorder felt proud because I had managed to remain just as unhealthy as I was in the sport of gymnastics, working out that much. So I was like, oh, I can still do this without gymnastics. But I just kept getting sicker and sicker until it got to the point where I was binge eating more than I ever had. And then the compensation, and then binging, and then restricting and compensate. I just could not keep up. So by spring of my senior year, I was binge eating 6 to 7 days a week. And at this point, it was this primal urge to eat and obsess over food and hoard food and bake and make stuff. And if you've read any of the research of dieting, this is what basically happens. We become obsessed with food. And so when you take dieting to the extreme, it only makes sense that for 6 to 8 months straight, I was just binge eating. And I tried to compensate, but I just couldn't keep up anymore. So starting at SEMO in fall of 2014, I felt the lowest I've ever felt, but I covered it up with a smile and bubbliness. I've always been the happy girl, but I did not know who I was. And so it took about 2 years before I finally had a more normal relationship with food. I still struggled with overeating, but it wasn't that primal drive. It was more so just that habit of okay, I don't know when to stop because I've never learned how to eat normal. I've just always either restricted or eaten everything. And so, but I really had the best 4 years ever. I met my now husband, SEMO was wonderful. Well, then when I graduated in 2018, I never saw it coming, but I relapsed pretty severely into anorexia. And again, had no idea. I did not see it coming until June of 2018. I still remember this day. And my now husband was up at the house visiting. We were visiting mom and dad, having a fun weekend. And I remember during lunch, there was a cookie jar on the counter. And so I had a cookie for dessert, and then I literally could not stop eating the cookies. And when you've experienced binge eating, you understand that binging and overeating are totally different. And so this was very scary to me because I felt like I could not stop. Whereas the overeating the past few years was just kind of more of a habit and this is good, I'm gonna keep eating it. I literally could not stop. And so I immediately, I freaked out. I didn't know what to do. And so later I texted some people. I was like, can you pray? I just binged again. So at this point, I recognized, I was like, well, I stepped on the scale and I wasn't weighing myself anymore at this point. I had a few years of food freedom. Well, I was significantly down from where my normal weight was. And so I was like, oh no, I've been restricting again. Because I knew that if I had binged like that, I had to be restricting again. So I was like, well, like anyone with anorexia says, oh, I got this. So I was like, I can do this. Again, hadn't even told my parents at this point or anyone. I was like, I can totally get it together before grad school. Well, it got worse and worse and worse. I kept declining throughout grad school until January of 2019, when I met, still to this day, my mentor, Janice Rissler, who was Janice Bunch then. And she, I was graduate assistant in the counseling services at SEMO, and she was my supervisor, and she pulled me in. It was her first week there, and she's like, you're ill. What can we do for you? And I was like, no. And I start pulling up pictures. I said, no, I was ill in high school. Let me show you how thin I was then and how ill I was. She said, where do you think you're headed? And I was like, okay, that's fair. Any addictive behavior, you don't stop without intervention. You can't do it alone, because the brain, once that eating disorder, that substance use disorder locks into the brain, it is a vicious illness that changes the brain to support that disorder above all else, above relationships and joy and life. And so I knew at this point, I was like, this is so true. So Janice was a big instrumental part of my recovery. She did blind weights with me. She checked in with me every single day. Every week, we basically had a counseling session, even though she was just my mentor and never had to do all that. She told me if I wanted my graduate assistantship the next semester, I needed to get help. So I had to go back to regular counseling and all that stuff. And the thing that I really wanted to share tonight, that really helped me more than anything, was after I kind of overcame the restriction piece again and started weight restoring, the binge eating came back, as it does when we restrict. We binge eat and in response. And so that part really hung around longer than I wanted it to this time. But we know that the more we diet, the more hardwired our brain gets about not having food. And so this binging was even worse than it was before. And before, I was eating pizza out of trash cans at work, and I was bussing tables and taking the food to the restaurant. And that is what binge eating is. It is it is disordered. It's your survival brain just kicks in. I have to eat above all else. I don't care what anyone thinks of me. I don't care if this is normal. And so the binge eating was just sticking. And I remember, even telling, my now husband, but then boyfriend, I was I'm just never going to kick this. Although it was more like this. It was oh, woe is me. I'm never going to kick this. I'm always going to have an eating disorder. I'm always going to binge eat. Wah, wah, wah. I would just constantly, because I'd have a few days and then I would binge, or I would restrict a food group. And then I would just get in my head again and just woe is me. And he was well, yeah, as long as that's how you're talking to yourself. I guess he hadn't realized that in my head, that was the internal dialogue going on all day long, every day. So that was the first thing. And then God spoke to me one day and clear as mud said, you will never rise above your highest confession. And that shook me. I was you are so right. If I'm constantly proclaiming failure over myself and that I'm always gonna suffer and I'm always gonna struggle with this eating disorder, I'm always gonna binge, I'm literally speaking those words into the universe. So what do I think is gonna happen? I'm just gonna keep failing. And so I began to speak life from that moment forward every single day. And I'm not saying every day was pretty, because there were days I was oh, this isn't working. No. But every single day from that moment till now, before my feet even hit the floor in the morning, I am proclaiming life. I am speaking life over myself. I am proclaiming that I am in recovery, that I have got this, that I don't struggle with food anymore, that because he calls into being that which doesn't exist. And so I know that scripture has power, that the words I speak have power. So I'm no longer using my words to speak things like failure and death into the atmosphere. I'm speaking life over myself. And so I feel there's one more thing I wanted to share. But, I did want to note that eating disorders, like any other addiction, it's something you live with every single day, and it doesn't go away. Those eating disorder thoughts are still there. Some days they're louder, other days they're more dormant. We went on vacation a few weeks ago, and I told my husband, mid-trip, I was I don't know where my eating disorder went, but I'm really enjoying this. I think it went on vacation for a little. It was great. They were real quiet for a few days there. So the eating disorder thoughts are something I live with every single day, but I just choose not to give them the focus and the attention that I used to, because I know where those thoughts lead, and I'm never going back there. So I've learned how to deal with emotions. I've learned how to deal with my imperfections, and that God created me just the way I'm supposed to be, and more than anything, just the power of my words and what I speak. So thank you, guys.
Hi, my name is Kelly Westbrook, and I don't know how I follow that up because I'm not a speaker. So and I also have memory issues, so that's why I have a couple notes. Anyway, I am here to talk to you guys about my experience as a survivor of a traumatic brain injury. And I had a car accident in 2012, so 11 years ago, and it was a traumatic brain injury and brain bleeds, and I was in a coma then for 12 days. And during those 12 days, my family and even the doctors had no idea what my recovery would be or if I would even recover at all. And then whenever I did wake up from a coma, I was really out of it still, so my parents they never knew if I would actually be like a functioning adult again. So I was in the hospital for a few months. Went through therapy there and then had therapy and outpatient therapy after leaving the hospital. And during all of this, I mostly suffered from memory issues because I don't remember the entire year before the accident. And during that time, there were a lot of big life events that had happened, like my grandfather passed away, and I did not remember it. So whenever we went to visit my grandparents after I came home from the hospital, after we left, I was like, Mom, where was Grandpa? And it was like, oh, you don't remember that. So then I had to go through that whole grieving process all over again. So then with the therapy, I was able to return back to work. I had graduated from nursing school at SEMO 2 years before the accident. And I worked at St. Francis, and my coworkers were great with my recovery. And they helped me a lot with coming back to work. But with working in labor and delivery in a hospital setting like that, it's so fast-paced, and I had to slow everything down, and you have to have really good memory when you're working. So it just wasn't a good fit anymore. So I had to step away from that, and that was really hard. But now I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I could not imagine being in a better place. And I couldn't imagine my life being any different because it was a complete 180. Like, I'm living in a completely different place. I'm with different people. Like, I have 3 boys now, and I wouldn't have that if I hadn't had the accident. And I feel like with my takeaway from all of that is that positivity and prayers. Like, I would not be here today if it wasn't for the prayers that everybody had been saying for me. I have an amazing family and friend group and community that were praying for me so hard. And positivity, I am a really positive person, never get down on myself. Like, it would be so easy to just be like, woe is me, and constantly be sad because it is hard to remember stuff. I rely on notes. I take notes for everything. My notes in my phone is really long. And I have a pill app to remind me to take my medicine because I'm 35 and I still need help remembering to take my medicine. And I have seizure medicine I have to take now twice a day, and that's because of the accident that I started having seizures then, 5 years after. So, I mean, my biggest takeaway from everything is just positivity and prayer. That's all you need. So, thank you so much.
Oh, yeah. That's fine. Good evening. I'm Jimmy Williams. I'm 15 years old and a freshman at Jackson High School. This really is God's story. He has given me a great role to play in it. My family moved to Jackson when I was 7 years old. I have loved sports for as long as I can remember, all sports. I've played baseball, tackle football, wrestling, and yes, golf. Jackson is definitely a sports-loving town, and I was immediately right at home. My dad is old. He could only throw a ball for about 30 minutes, but he could drive a golf cart all day. So golf became our main sport. We would often play 36 holes a day. At 9 years old, I started playing in junior golf tournaments and won almost every tournament I played in for the first couple of years. So, in the summer of 2019, I was 10 years old and I had qualified for the Hurricane Junior World Championships in Orlando, Florida. It was early August and really hot when we arrived. I had not been feeling good for quite some time, but I was still really excited to be there. It's a 3-day event with kids from all over the world. I got sick. My parents wanted me to quit, but I refused. I made it through the tournament and placed third. I was extremely happy, but totally exhausted. After several doctor's visits and one trip to the emergency room, I finally found my way to Cardinal Glennon Children's Hospital on August 23rd. There, I was diagnosed with dilated pediatric cardiomyopathy. My heart was enlarged and failing. I had 17% heart function. Shortly after being taken to the PICU, the IV started in my arms, hands, and feet. Lost my place here. Okay. Being dehydrated made all the pokes so much more difficult. 5 days into my stay, I had a tachycardia event. My heart was beating out of control. What seemed like a SWAT team of doctors and nurses rushed into my room. She gave me a drug through one of the IV lines, and my heart slowed back down. But I was in a bad spot. My heart rate was too high, and my blood pressure was too low. A really bad combination. They needed to put a line in my wrist, but they couldn't sedate me. The doctor is hesitant and tells me, "You can't move. I need to cut your wrist with a knife and run a wire up your arm." It hurts. I have tears running down my face, but I didn't move. I didn't complain. So, they put my name on the heart transplant list. First, I would have an open heart surgery to install an LVAD, a pump sewn into my heart. This was a temporary fix. In late September, they let me out of the hospital, but we needed to stay close. We were in a nearby apartment for months. My birthday is October 1st, and for my birthday, Dr. Huddleston took me to a Cardinals game. From there, life began to feel more normal. With a control module and a battery pack to run the LVAD stuffed in my backpack, we started exploring the central West End area of downtown. I found a golf course in Forest Park and started going almost every day to practice putting and chipping. I couldn't make a full swing with the motor in my chest and the wires coming out of my side. Every morning, my dad would put me in a wheelchair and walk me to Chick-fil-A at the St. Louis School of Pharmacy. I went to school each day at the hospital and had blood draws daily to make sure my blood was thin enough to run through the pump, but not too thin. It's called your INR level. I started getting visitors. Ozzie Smith came to our apartment, and we sat for a while and talked about the Cardinals making the playoffs, and we also talked golf. Jay Delsing, who spent 25 years on the PGA Tour, came by to meet me. He would become a regular. He took me to Norwood Hills Country Club, and we ate lunch and putted on some of the greens, and he also told stories about the course. Every time the phone rang, my mom would jump. "Is this it? Do they have a new heart?" Months would pass. To be honest, we all seemed pretty happy. It was not a sad time. I loved living in a loft apartment and enjoyed going out to the local restaurants. My sisters came from Tennessee quite a bit, and I had friends come spend the night. We really did make the best of it. God's grace had prepared me and my family. On December 11th, my dad and I were at lunch with Jay Delsing. He had a friend on the St. Louis Blues that let him bring the ring they got for winning the Stanley Cup. Jay was just handing me the ring when my dad's phone rang. We could tell by the look on his face, this is it. They had a heart. I was admitted the next day. I was nervous knowing what they were about to do, but I was totally confident. My room was packed with all the doctors and nurses that had cared for me for over all these months. It was late afternoon when Dr. Fiore, one of the transplant surgeons, came into my room, and together he prayed for me and God's guidance. Then they wheeled me to the operating room. Dr. Huddleston was on a plane to Illinois to retrieve the heart from the donor and bring it back in a cooler to Cardinal Glennon. The waiting room was packed with family and friends. The surgery took 14 hours, and finally, my parents got a call from the nurse in the operating room. We have a heartbeat. Dr. Fiore told my parents that because of the scar tissue from the LVAD, it was the most complicated surgery he had ever done in his 40 years as a heart surgeon. My recovery was also the best they'd ever had. So 10 days after my surgery, on Christmas Day, I was outside playing catch with my nurse. I was released on December 27th, and New Year's Day with staples in my chest, I was at the golf course chipping and putting. And on January 13th, 30 days after the transplant, with a suitcase full of pills, I was finally home in Jackson. My first goal after seeing my dog for the first time in months was to get back to school. I really missed seeing all my friends, but the anti-rejection meds lowered my immune system, so school wasn't an option. We didn't know that COVID was lurking in the background. The prednisone was making itself known. I gained weight, and most of it on my face. I looked like a different person. February 2nd was a really warm day. Dad loaded up our golf clubs, and we headed to Dalhousie. My first tee shot was down the middle. It felt great. It felt normal. Every day I practiced, either in my garage or on the course. May 28th, my first golf tournament in Dexter. It felt good to see all the kids that I'd grown up playing with. My feet hurt from the IVs, and walking was difficult. At the end of the round, we turned in our scores and waited for the results. A win. I was back. June 2nd, a win, and June 15th, a win. 3 tournaments in a row, all wins. The day after my third tournament, we get a call from the hospital. My biopsy results showed rejection, a word no transplant patient wants to hear. After 3 days in a hospital bed, getting pumped full of steroids, I started to look like the Pillsbury Doughboy. I'm back with my classmates after missing 2 years of school. I've played in 54 golf tournaments since my transplant and have added 36 medals and trophies to my growing collection. A couple of months after my transplant, I was asked to speak at the Heart and Soul Gala in front of 500 people and loved it. That event started me down the path of becoming a motivational speaker. I've been the MC for Holidays Heroes and the co-chair of Homers for Health for the past 2 years. I've participated in more fundraising events for Cardinal Glennon than I can count. For the past 3 years, my mom and I have had a toy drive, and thanks to our great community, we have delivered several thousand toys to the kids at Cardinal Glennon. After speaking at a number of events, I asked my dad to help me write a book. Attitude of Grace was published last year and was a #1 bestseller and #1 new release on Amazon Books. Today, my health is excellent. There is nothing I can't do. I take my meds twice a day and have regular blood draws and annual biopsies. I don't know yet what God wants me to do in the future, but I'm hoping it's play D1 golf. And if that's at the University of Tennessee, all the better. I thank God for everything He's done for me. I thank my parents and family for their incredible support. I thank my school and community for going out of their way and supporting all my efforts. And I always want to remember my donor, his family, and their decision. Organ donation saves lives. Please be a donor. Thank you.
Wow, that was awesome. I wish I had that perspective at 15 years old. Hi, guys. My name is Courtney Trankel, and I am a person living in long-term recovery. What that means is that for 25 years of my life, I lived in active substance use disorder. For those that don't know much about substance use disorder, what that means is that when I start, I can't stop. It's just that simple. Laura, who's my fabulous coworker, touched on the fact that, it is a disease that just takes over every rational part of your brain. It's not a moral issue. It's not a willpower issue. It's a disease. And, the more that we try to will it away, it just comes back with a vengeance. I have a lot of good stuff that's happened in my life since I've been in recovery, so I'm going to make the bad stuff as quickly as possible. From the time I can remember, I always felt less than or separate from or not a part of. And I like to say in my story that my substance of choice is more. More of anything, more attention, more drugs, more alcohol, more selfishness and greed. That's just the way that my brain is wired. And this disease is the only one that I'm aware of, that is the only one that convinces you don't have it. So when I was younger, I started using and drinking when I was 14 years old. I remember that first time ever putting a substance in my body. It was alcohol. I got blackout drunk, threw up everywhere, I'm sure made a fool of myself, and I couldn't wait to do it again. Like, that's crazy, that's what substance use disorder does to my brain. So I spent the next 25 years actively using and drinking. I had 2 children. I was an absent parent. I was not a good sister. I was not a good daughter. I was a bad employee. I lied. I quit jobs. I just did not take care of any responsibilities in life. My main focus and priority was drugs, alcohol, and more of them. So I was 39 years old, and I had gotten into some trouble. I knew that things were getting, pretty hairy with the legal system in myself, and I was out on a couple different bonds. And they'd all gotten revoked because, again, I could not stop using. I couldn't stop selling drugs, and it was just absolute insanity. I knew I was going to be going to prison for a trafficking charge. I just didn't know for how long. So during that time that I was out on bond, I continued to use, continued to sell drugs, and eventually got caught by the police after a high-speed chase, so not my finest moment. And I'll never forget, I was in jail. I had brought drugs into the jail with me. Still wasn't ready to quit using, which just blows my mind when I look back on it today. I still wasn't ready to quit using. And someone had told on me that I was in the jail with, and so the cops came in with the drug dog and a bunch of cops, and they were like, we know you have the drugs. We're going to take you for internal x-rays, and we know that you have them. And the criminal mindset in all of us that are active in that lifestyle, we don't admit that kind of stuff to the police. We just deny. And I don't know what it was. I was never raised with any kind of concept of God or, Jesus or anything like that. So I didn't know what it was. But something inside of me was just like, it was just in my spirit and in my gut. Something just told me, just give up. Just quit running. Just surrender. And so I handed the police the drugs that I had on me, which resulted in another charge, but that's okay. That was March 30th of 2017, and I did use that day, so my sobriety date is March 31st of 2017. And from there, I went to prison shortly after. Once I was in prison, I entered a Christian discipleship ministry and reentry program called Beauty for Ashes. There, I was able to just make this insane transformation internally that allowed me to stop relying on self so much, because that's what us active addicts and alcoholics do. We're all about self, you know. And from learning all that I got to learn about my Savior, my need for a Savior, who He was, it was just the most freedom I've ever felt sitting in a prison. You know, and that can be a pretty lonely place. You know, you're watching holidays come and go, the first Thanksgiving, the second Thanksgiving. You're calling home, and you realize that life goes on. It doesn't stop because you're locked up in a cell. You know, and that's a pretty humbling experience. But I felt peace. And I wondered, you know, is this going to continue when I get out? So fast forward 2.5 years, you know, I got out of prison. I do want to say, when I did my first read-through of the Bible in that ministry, I came across a verse, which is my life verse. It was Ezekiel 40, verses 1 through 4, and it says, on April 28th, the Lord took hold of me. He said, "Son of man, watch and pay attention. I've brought you here to show you many things, so you can go back to the people of Israel and show them everything that you've seen." Well, April 28th is the day that I got to prison, and I just felt this calling to come back to Cape Girardeau, and I got a lot of flack about that from people that I was in prison with, you know, my IPO, counselors, the women in the ministry. They were like, "Why don't you go somewhere new and start fresh?" And I just felt this calling to come back to Cape Girardeau so that I could show the people of Israel everything I've seen. See, for me, Cape Girardeau back then was my Israel. I wanted to come back to my stomping grounds and show people that recovery was possible. But first I had to be successful at it, you know. I'll never forget my amazing children came and picked me up from prison. By this time, they were 21. My beautiful daughter's here tonight. She was 21. My son was 12. And you got to think, like, I've been an absent mother. For all of my adult child's life, I was either an active addict or in prison. She should want to have nothing to do with me and would have had every right to be that way. But her and my son picked me up, and they were supportive of me. And I told them that first night, you know, I love you guys so much, and I want nothing more than to sit here and just love on you and be with you, but I need to go to a meeting. And so I took myself to a meeting, and I never stopped, thank God. Through working the 12 steps in my program of recovery and getting involved in my church, which I started out going to LaCroix, I got involved with this ministry called Alpha. A friend of mine, I was missing community when I got out of prison, you know, because we were in a sealed wing, you know, with this one program, and we were so supportive and uplifting of each other, and we were studying the Word, and we were doing all this amazing stuff, and it just left you feeling so lighthearted. I was missing that community when I got out. I knew I didn't want to go back around the people that I used to use with, and so what does that look like? You can't isolate. You can't lock yourself up in an apartment and just do nothing. You know, you have to find healthy relationships. So my friend suggested Alpha. So I went, and Alpha is a ministry that LaCroix, it's a worldwide ministry, but LaCroix hosts it, and it was exactly what I was looking for. It is a series of films that just answers questions about faith. And you know, explores that with people, and it's a safe environment to bring any question to the table. And it was beautiful. It was exactly what I was looking for. I built these amazing connections with people that I'm still in contact with today, and it was just awesome. So from there, I started doing Alpha trainings. I got to share my testimony with, people that I was training to help run Alpha. Through that, I got offered a state representative position through Alpha USA. So I'm the Missouri advisor for Alpha Prison Ministry and Reentry. I'm currently working on going back into the prisons so that hopefully I can help share the love of Jesus with people that are still locked up. I know how beneficial that was in my life, and I just want to give that away to somebody else. So I got off parole about a year and a half ago, and the Missouri Department of Corrections says you have to be off parole longer than that. But I serve a big God, and I don't take no for an answer, so I'm going to keep submitting that paperwork. And it's so crazy how God has just blessed my life. Like, my children and I today have the most amazing relationship. It's so different than anything that I could have ever known and dreamed of for myself. I've been sober now for 6.5 years. I am a peer specialist at the Gibson Center for Behavioral Change. And ironically enough, I'm also part-time on staff at LaCroix. So I get to work in my two biggest passions, which is Jesus and recovery. I mean, does it get much better than that? Like, that's pretty cool. I mean, you got to think, I'm just a drug addict who's been indulgent and selfish her entire life and just shirked any responsibility that I ever had. And here I am working in treatment in the church, but God. Because this is not my doing. I mean, I put in some work, but this is God's doing. I just want to encourage anyone out there who maybe has, I know there's stigma surrounding, addiction, and people that have gone to prison. And I just want to encourage you guys to maybe look beyond that, or to help spread the word for people to look beyond that, because, they say like weed is a gateway drug, but I can promise you, from firsthand experience and from dealing with my patients, trauma is a gateway drug. And most of us, we start off using and drinking because we're trying to run from something or we're trying to feel something. I'm so grateful I don't have to do that anymore. And I'm so grateful that today my life can be one of giving rather than one of taking, because that's all I ever used to do was take. I would take your time, your emotions, your stuff, your money. I took my children's childhood, a good portion of it. And although I have an intense accountability, my God allows me to have some grace too. He tells me that there's time to make all those things, to correct all those wrongs. And he told me that, he makes all things new. And so I just encourage everyone out there who knows someone in addiction, or maybe has a negative mindset of those in addiction, just think about it. What if that was your son or your daughter or your husband or your wife? We're not bad people trying to get good. We are sick people trying to get well. And it's such a beautiful thing when we do. I am so honored to be able to walk alongside people in early recovery now and share my experience, strength, and hope with them, to hopefully give someone else, maybe a fighting chance to see their worth in life. So, thanks.
Good evening. Those are some awesome stories. I've asked Mia to come up here with me because I can't talk about my story without being emotional. And so this is actually the first time I've shared my story. Sorry. I've been asked numerous times and I just couldn't do it. And then out of the blue, Mia calls and she's like, hey, I heard you have a cool story. I'm like, no. And then I'm like, okay, God, I get it. It's time. I'm going to do it. And so I met with Mia, and she kind of walked me through it. And so I said, I don't know if I can get up there tonight. You're probably going to have to come up there with me. So I have a few notes. And so if I stop, she might have to give me a few prompting questions. So I just want to say those stories that you guys gave, those were amazing. So proud of you to be able to get up here and say that and share and help others through that. but I'm excited to be here. Many said I wouldn't be here. The diagnosis said I wouldn't be here. I was diagnosed with a very aggressive type of stage 4 colon cancer on January the 9th of 2019. My life was in full swing. I was a wife, I was a Mimi, I'm a mom, I'm a social worker, you name it, I'm doing it. And wow, you talk about being knocked off your feet. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with that? And so I said, okay, God, here it is. What do you want me to do? Is it 1 or is it 100? The social worker in me kicked in. I'm like, okay, I got to use this to help somebody. What can I do? So I decided, it's time for me to come up with a plan. And my husband and I went and I said, I got to know what I'm up against before I can form my plan. And, everybody kept saying, that's a diagnosis that's going to result in death. And I just kept asking God, what do you want me to do with this? Help me. I'm not ready to give up. I have a family and I have amazing grandbabies, so you can see I'm running all over out here. I wanted to fix it. So I said, God, let's get this together. So I pleaded over and over with God, please just don't take me from my family and my grandbabies. So my husband and I met with the medical team, and we got the treatment plan and began to move forward. I had so many emotions and so many conversations with God that I have to say, some were great, some I'm not proud of. Many emotions. I just kept saying, God, why me? Why do I have to go through this and do this? Over and over, he kept reassuring me that he had a plan for it all. The news was radiation, chemo, surgery, and a colostomy. I was 49 years old. I don't want a colostomy. So there were signs all along the way that God kept telling me, it's going to be okay. And I began to feel a peace about it. So there were signs along the way. So my husband takes me to St. Louis to my first radiation appointment. He can't go back with me. I walk in and I'm like, first of all, the room was like 40 degrees in there, it felt like. And all these machines everywhere, and of course it's embarrassing, it's colon cancer. I'm gonna have to put my butt in the air to have radiation treatment, I'm laying on the table and I'm just scared to death. And the tech looks at me and she says, are you okay? She said, are you scared? I said, I'm scared to death. She's like, don't be afraid. She said, do you want to listen to music? And I said, yes. And she said, what kind? I said, contemporary Christian music. And she put it on that moment, I knew it was going to be okay. Lauren Daigle's song played, Trust in You. And to this day, my absolute favorite song. I can't hear the song without crying. In fact, I loved it so much, I took my granddaughter to see Lauren Daigle. So after that, fast forward, and kept thinking, woe is me, and I just kept trying to change that mindset. I'm like, I have cancer, but cancer doesn't have me. I have got to fight this. I can do this. And I'm like, I'm a social worker. I have to empower other people. So it was hard for me to ask for people to pray for me or to help me. And it wasn't that I didn't want the help and didn't want that. I'm the fixer. I can do this. And so we continued on through the radiation and through the chemo. And I was to have 16 weeks of chemo, but I only made it through 12 because it caused damage to my heart, so I had to stop. So we know that I still have cancer cells. We know that they weren't all destroyed, but here I am, So far, so good. And I have to say that the type of chemo that I had was called 5FU, appropriately named. It was terrible. The side effects that people don't understand is, you're going to lose your hair. I lost my fingernails, my toenails, eyelashes, and I would get my chemo, have to take a bag home and wear it for 48 additional hours. And my husband and I kind of can now joke about it, saying that don't turn the lights off because you're going to glow in the dark, because the type that I had was so strong. And they'd be like, don't let anybody use the bathroom after you. Don't let anybody sleep with you, because the type of chemo that I had was so strong. But it did the trick. It shrank the tumor. And so then I was able to have surgery. So fast forward through surgery, and, I'm going in knowing they're going to remove the tumor. And I come out of surgery and I wake up and I have a bag. And I'm like, I just can't. And I'm like, there's just something about looking down and seeing poop come out your belly into your bag. It was just too hard. And my husband, God love him, he could change it. We kept going, I can't look at it, I can't smell it, I can't see it. And finally, I'm like, I gotta get strong, I gotta be able to do this. I can't always have him changing my poop bag, as we called it. And we did. So I just felt like, all of those things were meant to kill me. And God just kept reassuring me that it's going to be okay. So we kept moving fast forward, kept trying to push through that. But every day had a struggle of some kind. Even as I told Mia, during the treatments, one day my husband wasn't available to take me, so my brother's like, hey, I'll take you. We're driving to St. Louis, to downtown Barnes, 8 o'clock in the morning, downtown St. Louis traffic. We're on the inside lane. Bam, we get rear-ended, shoved into another car. Totals my car. My brother, of course, freaks out, jumps out of the car, runs over, you okay, okay? Well, it ruptured my bag. And so then they're calling for an ambulance. Ambulance comes. They come to the passenger door where I'm sitting, and they're like, oh my God, what is that smell? I'm like, it's me, dude. It's me. My bag had ruptured. And they're putting me in the ambulance, and my brother is standing on the side of the highway of Interstate 55 downtown. I'm like, what about my brother? And they're like, ma'am, he's a big boy. He'll figure it out. We got to clear the scene and go. Another time, I had just had another surgery and was in the hospital, and a tornado came to Barnes Jewish, and we had to evacuate the room and go out into the hall. Another time, I was released from the hospital. We were driving home, and the serpentine belt broke on the car, and we're stranded. One thing after the other, and I just kept saying, God, I get it, but how much, And through that, I just wanted to, I kept telling myself, what am I supposed to do with this? What am I supposed to do with this? So I kept keeping that in the back of my mind, that through every trial, I'm gaining the strength that I can then learn as I'm a school social worker and work with middle schoolers, that I can say, no matter how hard it is, you can get through it. It is to be motivation, not an excuse. And every day, it strengthened my faith. Some struggles were extremely hard. Every day was not good. I would lay in bed and I would just say, I couldn't say anything. I had so much pain and was so tired and so weak, I would just say, Jesus. Some days I would say, Jesus, take me. I can't do this anymore. Because I knew at that point, and I told my family, hey, if I get to stay here and I beat this, I am a winner. But if I get called home, I'm still going to be a winner, so don't be sad for me. And so kept going, and I kept thinking, I love my career, and I was taken away from my career, and I hated that, and I really, really wanted to get back to that and continue to face those financial struggles. And I had to take 26 pills a day and 3 shots, and they were just terrible. I would cry and cry because they hurt so bad I didn't want to take the shots. And kept saying, I'm just done. I don't want to go through this anymore. But God kept saying, yeah, you do. That this is just a season, All seasons change, and you can do this. So I keep that mindset, and I keep that knowing when I'm counseling with students or with families that my story is able to help other people. And when I was first diagnosed, I didn't know how or what, but now I see that unfolding, and I'm blessed from that. So I want to use this experience to show everyone how you can help others, and and you can do hard things. And the other thing I want to say is, if you haven't had a colonoscopy, please get one. My insurance wouldn't let me have one. They said I was too young. I had to beg and beg and beg to get one at 49 years old. And I know the age limits and things are changing now, but, you know, I used to have a colonoscopy every 3 months. And so I had one in September, and my husband and I were there, and the doctor was like, hey, I want to talk to you guys. And I'm just like freaking out and knowing, you know, something's wrong. And then just keep being reminded from God that just calm down and listen. And he said to me, you're a miracle. I saw the pathology. I did the surgery. I saw it. You're a miracle. I'll see you in 3 years. And I'm like, whoa. Yeah. So, and lastly, I just want to say thank you to my family. Thank you.
Thank you so incredibly much to all the people who shared your stories here tonight. Yeah, I just don't even have words for it. So thank you just for your gift of giving your experiences to us, for us to get to learn from you. I wanted to give a few minutes now if anyone has any questions that they wanted to ask to any of our speakers who shared their stories. I'm not sure if anyone does, but just in case, I wanted to open that up. So does anyone have a question for anyone? Okay, well, I'm sure that, and if you have one that you want to ask in private later, I think our speakers will be around for a little bit after we conclude here, so feel free to talk with them more. Thank you all again so much for being here with us tonight to receive these stories of perseverance, tenacity, and hope from the people in our community. Thank you again to our presenting partner, St. Francis Foundation, and to Rust Media and the Southeast Missourian for believing in the power of story to transform this place that we call home. Thank you again so much to Jody and to Lara and Kelly and Jimmy and Courtney and Donna for sharing your stories with us and for your vulnerability, authenticity, and courage. You inspire and encourage us to continue along the way. And again, for everyone here, we hope these stories inspire you to persevere through your own struggles with hope and determination as we go forth from this place tonight. If you want a copy of the special section that has the written stories and photos from all these people that was in the newspaper, we do have some extra ones on the table back there, so feel free to take some of those. And thank you all again so much, and I hope that you have a wonderful night.